Ladies and gentlemen, and all our esteemed participants, a warm welcome to you to the Trusts and Estate Planning Masterclass, which is a collaboration between the best trust company in Kenya, ICEA Lion Trust Company, and yours truly, Mama BIMA. It's a pleasure to have each and every one of you joining us today. And today we'll be delving into the intricacies of securing and preserving wealth for generations to come. And as we want you to understand is that planning is not just a matter of management. It's about creating a legacy that withstands the test of time, okay? And ensuring that your hard-earned wealth is distributed according to your wishes and that your loved ones are provided for even in your absence. And today we have the privilege, amazing gentleman, Mr. Peter Wachira, the CEO of ICEA Lion Trust Company. And also on the call and supporting us behind the scenes, we have 3 trust consultants from ICEA Lion Trust Company. We have the amazing Susan Mathenge, the amazing Jane Munyori, and also the amazing Nahashon Muirori. Okay, so today I do hope that you have your notebook, you have your pen, and you're ready to learn because Peter comes with a wealth of experience on matters trust and estate planning. So without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to Peter. Peter, we are expectant. It's your time. Please take over the show kindly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mama BIMA. Please confirm my sound here.
It's
fantastic, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled to share this knowledge with you. I've dubbed this a conversation around family wealth beyond generations. But as Mama BIMA has said, you will see within the conversation that this is way beyond a conversation of wealth. It's actually more of a conversation about the family system and how it transcends generations and how you stabilize a holistic framework, ecosystem that would stabilize your generational transition. And of course, there are a lot of tools that we'll talk about that support that conversation. So when you're talking about creating generational wealth, one of the things that you're actually thinking about is, just hold on one second. One of the things that you're trying to think about is your family. And in the African setting, we have a story that we have for the families. And because we're looking forward, always try to look back at where we have come from as a family. And I would want us to begin a quick poll with a question on how many generations ago can you remember? How many generations of your ancestors can you remember? Nyokabi, if you could please put up the poll. I'll be happy if you could select several of the generations that you can remember. So generation 1, you are generation 0. Generation 1 are your parents. Gen 2 are your grandparents. Then all the way to as many generations as possible. I'll just give you a moment to select the number of generations that you can recall. Okay, I hope we are selecting. And as we do that, fun fact, and there will be a prize to this. Mama BIMA assured me of this. According to the Guinness World Record, The current actively running family wealth that has been running for the longest has been running for 717 years. The family business is from Japan. It is on their 46th generation now, going to 47th. Obviously, there are other family businesses that have been running for much longer than that, actually even more than 1,500 years, but most of them have either become dormant or they are not very active. So according to the Guinness World Record, the longest running active family business has been running for 717 years on its 46th generation today. And it's from Japan. And possibly just for information purposes, if you go to Wikipedia and you look for the longest running family businesses, 6 of them are from Japan. There are a few from Germany, a few from France, Austria, quite a number from the European region. And you will see why some of those families have been running for that long from part of this conversation. And I hope to poke your mind into a thought process that would stabilize the family system to the future. So Yokabi, I don't know whether we are ready with the results of the poll. If you're ready, we could close the poll and probably display the results. Okay, as we do that, I will proceed. I want to begin with this proverb. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. And I have deliberately put there ... to demonstrate that the children's children's children is a continuing thing. And what a good man or a woman does is that you want to lay the foundation for the success of the generations that comes after you. And this is more or less a true natural fact that is supported by scripture. Our Creator has made everything beautiful in its time. There's one other fact that he has put in us, that he has also set eternity in the heart of man. And this is so fundamental because when you look at our family systems, most of what we try to do is that we are trying to lay down structures that can help us empower future generations with a gift of choice. On what choices do they make about the sustenance of the family system? What choices do I make today to prepare them for the choices that we'll make? And then we're also trying to create an enduring family legacy, so that the legacy that I leave behind somehow would also be picked up by the generations that comes after me, and they will also make it their own legacy. This is fundamental because in the African setting, we always think about conversations around wills and trust or estate planning being conversations about death. But when you actually think about it, we are part of a long-running life journey. A life journey that began many generations past. And a life journey that will continue for many generations to come. So that now, when you're talking about generational wealth or family system or estate planning, it is really not about death or life. It is actually about how do we continue writing that story many generations to come. So that now, the opportunity we have is that we are simply a bridge along that life story. And whatever we do today becomes really critical in ensuring that we actually shape and direct how that story continues. And this is becoming a very active practice today that most families are now going back to say, can we write down our life story? And can we probably write down how we would desire this life story to unfold into the future? At any one time, you may have at most 3 generations running. You may have yourself, your parents, probably your grandparents, and for the very lucky families, they may still have great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, still available. But in most cases, you may realize that because of natural systems, we hardly have people living beyond 100 years. And if you look at a generation being about 30 years, so within 100 years, you may probably have 3 generations living at the same time. And this is important, and it will come very clear in our future conversations, on the conversations that will follow after this, because that generational sphere that is available at any one period is really critical to help shape the family system into the future. So that now, we now talk about we are actually participating actively in crafting the future of the family, in crafting the continuation of the family story that you're talking about. Now, when it comes to generational wealth, how then do you lay the foundation to pass on the family wealth baton across the generational line? I want to build this by laying a contextual foundation using an example of a family that I interacted with last year. There are other examples that exist in this country, and I will mention them probably after this. So last year, I went for an educational trip to Singapore. I think in Kenya, we always say that in the 60s and 70s, we were somewhere at the same level in terms of the social structure, economic structure as Singapore. So this is one family that we visited, and their story is recorded from 1979. What was happening there is that 4 brothers then, who are in generation 2, decided to take over the family business. And you can see from that photo that before then, it was just the normal farming, like what we do in most of our rural areas in Kenya, just normal subsistence farming. But they decided we really want to do things differently. So they went ahead and did a lot of work. There's a lot of silence between 1979 and 1999, where we now see the family has incorporated the family business. And by that time, they're already doing, more advanced farming. It's still basic, normal farming like what we do here, but they've now incorporated the family business as a company, and they've started supplying vegetables to leading supermarkets in Singapore. In 2011, we see now developments coming in. They started investing in high-tech machinery to increase activity and efficiency in the farming process. And in 2016, we see them now going into hydroponics, high-tech farming. There's a lot of progression that seems to be happening in this family. And by 2023, when I was there, they are now going into more high-tech farming, green harvesting, and beyond that now, value addition. This is a picture that I took of one of their products that they are now supplying to the supermarkets. And as of 2023, 2024 now going forward, the operations of the family business is now being run by the 4th the third and the fourth generation, mainly, and of course, other employees. But what struck me a lot in this conversation is that this, you may think, is a huge corporation or a huge farming engagement. The family is only on 10 acres. And by 2023, from that 10 acres, they were exporting to supermarkets in Singapore and outside Singapore over 4 tons of produce every day. So from my brief farming background, if you compute that into what that translates to, you'll be talking about, on a daily basis, that 10 acres is producing almost 1.5 million. You know, if you translate that to Kenya shillings, of revenue from 10 acres. But what struck me more is on how they have built that story. In fact, these photos you're seeing are photos that they have put in their training room, where they are showing how it has progressed from one generation, one stage to the next. This is so important because it starts making the story of life very active and alive for future generations to actually see that this is where we've come from. This is how we've gotten to different stages, and they're inspired to now go into unfolding that story into the future. There are other stories like that. In Kenya, I know of a company that I truly admire called the Davies and Shartif. They have recorded their family story or their business story from the 1927 when they started in Westlands, a small engineering firm in Westlands, where they are now in Tatu City, but supplying in 90 regions across Africa, moving over 3 billion worth of assets every 3 months. We also know of local stories like the Chandaria family that would be talking of 100 years of legacy from when the family came from India, settled in Kenya, and what they have done today with now the family empire spreading across the world. These examples I am giving them, not only because of the success that we actually see in them, but because of the inspiration that they actually give in the conversation around generational wealth transition and what can actually, you know, the kind of potential that families have in crafting generational wealth. But before we look at the successes, let's look at probably what statistics are telling us on what are some of the challenges that come with generational wealth transition. Now, when you look at most families, some of the items that cause the failures of wealth transition or successful wealth transition has actually nothing to do with the wealth itself. In fact, 97% of the cost has nothing to do with the wealth. It's only 3% that has a lot to do with now structures, the legal advice, the legal framework that you put in place, the investment structure that you put in place. But the biggest contributor is the family system. Breakdown in the family communication and trust. As Peter Wachira, I have siblings and my family could be, you know, well off somehow. If my parents were to pass on and now my siblings and we are trying to receive what our parents left behind, one of the biggest challenges is usually now the trust aspect within the family members, where we have a property in Nairobi and another property in somewhere in Murang'a. And what we are trying to figure out, who gets the property in Nairobi, who gets the property in Murang'a, who gets that property that is probably 10 times more valuable than the property in a different location. And we end up now, you know, picking up, you know, fights against each other over the property. Number 2 contributor is inadequately prepared heirs. And I think this is so critical because it will bring out part of the practices that we need to bring on board to help families and the future generations pick up on what we've laid down as a foundation. Then followed very closely, 12% by failure to establish a family mission. I'll talk about this next in just shortly in the future slides on how this 97% can actually be cemented to facilitate the structures that you're putting in place and to facilitate the transition of those structures into the future. But this gives us important information. Number one, research has shown that in most cases, the third, fourth, and fifth generation is the biggest risk that the family has. So most families are likely to lose their wealth by the third generation. And you can very easily rationalize why that would happen. If you are first generation, most probably you're the creator of the wealth. You are the one who will actually be frugal. You'll be the entrepreneur. You're the one who will, cultivate discipline, go through all the troubles to actually generate the family wealth. And by the time, the business is growing, maybe your children may have watched you. And that is Gen 2. They have watched the struggle that you have gone through to protect them, to, create the business, stabilize the business, those cycles of the business growth. And so when they take over the business from you as Gen 2, they are more likely to protect your interests. They are more likely to protect the family business in such a way that they do not want to go back to the struggles that you started with. Unfortunately, if we do not lay the right foundation, or if we do not create the right structures, Gen 3 in most cases come in when the world has already stabilized. The world has already been created. And naturally, if we do not bring them on board and probably train them on the value system that created that world, they are likely to be incapacitated on how to take care of that world. They are our children who will probably never go, enter a matatu while going from, home to the CBD. They're the ones who will probably never know what it means to wear a worn-down shoe. They're the ones who will probably never sleep hungry. And so when Gen 2 are passing on the wealth from them, to them, the only thing that they know is on how to enjoy the trappings of family wealth. And so the first thing that comes to mind is a big car, possibly a big house. They have no idea how to actually now perpetuate that value into the future. And I have experienced and interacted with very many Gen 3s or Gen 4s who are fed up by the noise that is in the family system. What they are saying is that they are now beginning another generation one and saying that I want to actually now move out of the family and start my own hustle and possibly start my own, family tree out of there. Yet it is possible to actually say that the foundations that have been laid down, that you would lay down as Gen 1, or you probably may have received from, your parents or your grandparents, you may be Gen 2, Gen 3, that foundation can be a seed that can perpetuate the success of the family and make it easier for every other generation to pick it up and actually flow quite easily. So what are we talking about? That regardless of the value of the assets within the family, we have to enable or empower the generations that comes after us to value the wealth that we pass on to them. We have to empower them with the financial wisdom that would actually enable them to look at those assets, not just as assets, but as wealth, as value that you're passing down to them. And then we have to also understand that we have to be very deliberate to actually handle issues of trust and communication within the family members and prepare the family members that comes after us, the generation that comes after us, on what to do to maintain the family unity, because it's trying to do. You're trying to inculcate the first generation mindset. And you can pass down that mindset along every generational line. So the question would be then, on how do you do that? In our experience, in our interaction with many families, we realized that this conversation is actually trying to bring in a mindset on how do you build a multi-generational family system? And how does that family system look like? There's something that we crafted as ICEA Lion called the family system, the ICEA Lion way. And this continues to morph as we learn from interaction with many families. And what you're trying to do here is look at this as this Venn diagram as the whole system that you're trying to balance. You're beginning with the family members. We talked about the generational story. You talked about at any one time, there are several generations that are represented within the family. Anything that you're doing, you're planning around the family members. And you want to ask yourself, who are we as a family? What's the composition of the family membership? And then you want to bring out the concept of what has been done in the past and how can we learn from that? And bring in the concept that what we are doing, we are not just doing it for ourselves. We are doing it for future generations. Then you also want to ask yourself questions on how do we relate as a family? How are we connected as a family? How do we cooperate with each other? And this is so fundamental because when you look at the practice of most families, we are a developing nation and we probably don't have a lot of, structures within our family system. And what happens is that we want to really give the best to our children. We want to give them the best education. And when they are educated, probably up to O levels, if we are able to, we want to send them to the Western world so that they can actually get a world global perspective. But then we have in ourselves, you remember that, perspective of the eternity that we have in ourselves, that legacy continuation that we want to build. We have in ourselves that the children that we have sent in Australia, in the US, in, wherever, would come back and take up the 10-acre farm that I have in Moranga, or the 2-acre farm that I have in Dumberi somewhere. And possibly they can, perpetuate that and hold it as a family asset and maybe build from what they have acquired from global knowledge into something that they can pass down to my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren. But then we fail to put in the structures that will help them to be connected with what I desire them to ultimately come and take care of. It is very good and very encouraged that we actually help them to really go out there and conquer the world. But the question would be on how do we connect them, the family? And this may not even be a global perspective. Even in Kenya, we have scenarios where I come from Moranga and, I bring up my children in Moranga, but they're educated and they get their jobs in Nairobi. And how many times do they connect back to their roots in Moranga, to the family world in Moranga? And how can they add value to that? You realize that we probably go to see our parents or they come to see us as parents, maybe 3 months down the line, or probably once or twice in the year. And when they come, they are coming in for just 1 day and they disappear back to Nairobi. And you realize that the connection to the family keeps weakening over time unless we become deliberate enough to actually build that, because we are building around the family. The other perspective that you may want to bring on board here is that the family members may be one of the most valuable assets that the family has. For one simple reason, if a family is running a family business, you may desire that the family members coming to the family business to grow it, because you're likely to achieve more because that person is fully loyal to the family system. In fact, the corporate world is trying to do that through trusts, where they want to pass on some part of the company shareholding to the employees so that they can build loyalty. Within the family system structure, that loyalty is already natural within the family membership. And you desire that you can actually build upon the family members and bring capacity for those family members to keep building on what you have. So the next bubble is the bubble of the value system that you put in place within the family system. Here we are talking about who are we as a family? How do we craft shared goals as a family? How do we craft shared visions? What is it that we believe in? What is it that we practice? What are the guiding principles that would guide how we make decisions? For example, if there's a certain critical decision that we need to make, it may be around the family membership or around the family wealth. How do we make that decision? Let me make it probably very practical. If within the family system, there's a divorce that happens, and there's wealth that has been passed down to the children who are struggling in their marriage, how do you make decisions around the family wealth when that happens? That becomes a value system. There's a very consistent practice that is building up in value system called a family constitution. You probably may have heard of it, where the family crafts down guiding principles that would guide them on how they make those decisions, that would guide their growth of their belief system. What is it that we believe in? The rule of thumb is that that has to be a written down document. Number two, that it has to be a practiced document, that it has to be a live document. And this is very fundamental because when you look at our African system, we have passed down the values of the family through stories, through, sitting down, with our grandparents and learning how did they used to do this. And what has happened? That most of us may have actually lost much of the values that may have been passed down the generational line. The most important value system we have is the scriptures. Imagine if God decided that the story of the house of Jacob is passed down, through stories, and that it's not written down. We know what happens with, this game of the broken telephone. How would that story of the scripture be looking today? I mean, would not even believe that guys would have been in the desert with nothing for a whole 40 years. It would not make sense to us. But God decided by design that that story is actually written down and it's passed down. But now, it is so fundamental to now also practice what you have written down because it basically perpetuates the guiding principle that you have laid down. And we see this in the story of, again, the house of Israel. The great king, King David, God promised him that his empire would run forever. But we realized that his empire actually disintegrated on the third generation that we're talking about here, principally because of the guiding principle that he did not inculcate within his family. You realize when you read the scriptures that every time the kings would read the scriptures, they would actually be cut to the heart. And they would say, we need to repent as a society. But they would quickly put aside the scriptures and go back to their ways in the level where you realize that down the line, the system within that society was totally messed up to the level where parents were actually sacrificing their children. And that is how bad it can actually get in a family system. That's why I'm saying, when you're putting together a family system and you're putting together a guiding principle, it has to be written down. But number two, you have to make every effort to make it a live document. But also, make it in such a way that future generations can actually refer to it and build upon it so that they can actually bring on board practices that are relevant to their times. What are you trying to do with that? You're basically trying to craft a family culture that is guided on what's the value system within the family? What are the things that guides our practices? What does it mean to actually have dinner as a family every other day? How does that build on the family connection? How does that build on the trust and getting to know each other? What does it mean to have a family meeting, a family AGM, probably once a year? It could be a hybrid where, we have the advantage of now having that probably both virtual and physical, because you want to build the family fabric as you're also trying to build in the value system. The third bubble is the bubble of the family wealth. We are talking about the family business, the assets. But now you want to bring in the perspective of what constitutes the family wealth. A lot of the families that would probably be struggling with succession planning, fighting over assets. They are fighting over that piece of land or that shareholding. But we need to help families understand that the family wealth is beyond the assets. The assets are just the foundation of it. And let me give a quick example. If I am running a family business, any business person knows that the assets that I have, probably the buildings and the machinery that I have, are just assets. Value is unlocked through the business networks that I create, the distribution network that I create, the supply system that I create, the knowledge on how to continue making the solutions or the products that you create. That is probably 1,000 times more valuable than the assets alone. And so when you're passing down the family wealth, what are you passing down? Are you only passing down the wealth, the assets, or are you passing down the whole wealth ecosystem? Because what you want to do is that the family wealth continues to grow and empowers the prosperity of both the individuals within the family, the generation that comes after them. But also, because we know that the family tree will continue to grow, we also want to make sure that the balance sheet of the family continues to grow into perpetuity, and it can actually match the growing family system. But now the value system that you have also created also creates the framework for responsible stewardship of the family wealth, so that any future generations that comes on board are guided on how to manage that. This this environment is so critical because it basically lays the foundation for the 97% of the bigger challenge that the family has. But the 3% is also so critical because it lays the foundation. And this is what I'll be talking about now on the last part of the conversation, where we are now talking about estate planning. It is at the core of the family system because this is where you're defining how the family wealth or the family assets are owned and how they transition to other generations. You're basically putting together a framework for the ownership of the family wealth and the legal structures that would guide the succession of that wealth. And this is now the conversation about estate planning, the conversation about how do we create generational wealth transition. Now, we are very knowledgeable about a lot of financial planning. You will talk about, risk management through an insurance solution. Or, we know that once we earn some money, we will not put that money under our mattress. We will probably manage that through maybe a bank account or an investment account and all that. But hardly do we have a conversation around estate planning, which is also one of the most critical planning structures that we need to have within the family system. Because you're not only planning for finances or assets, you're basically planning for a much wider perspective. You're basically expanding that into a generational perspective. You're now having conversations about who are the guardians of my vulnerable beneficiaries if I am not there? What finances are we talking about? What assets are we talking about? Or are we just talking about assets? Or are we talking about the whole value system? Who will protect those assets? And how would they be protected? If I need something executed to pass on to some heirs, who will be the executor? Who are the heirs and how am I preparing them to actually receive what I would want to pass down to them? And how would I guide them on how to receive it and manage it in the future? Then what does death mean when it comes to the family? And now that we're actually talking about a life story that continues for many generations, started many generations past, continues for many generations past. It's no longer about death. It's actually about transitions. It's about actually now passing down that baton through the generational line. It's a very important conversation that we need to bring on board as part of not just financial planning, but family planning conversation. Now, when you're talking about assets, from a practical perspective and a legal perspective, you generally have two types of assets. Now, there's what is referred to as assets that comprises part of your estate. And part of your estate basically means these are assets that, in case you pass on, the legal structures would guide on how they would be passed on to your heirs. So you're talking about your real estate, your personal properties like your jewelry, your ring, your business interest, shareholding that you directly own, your vehicles and other valuables that are titled to you. But there's the other category of assets, which is referred to as non-probate assets. These are assets that you do not own, but they are contingency assets, like your life insurance policy, your retirement account, your pension plan, your investment that is held in your trust, like your money market account. Generally, these are assets that are outside your estate and would typically be passed down through a means of a beneficiary designation. So when you're setting up that structure, you have nominated a beneficiary that in case you're not there, they would be the recipients of that. And ordinarily, those assets would not comprise part of your probate process in case you pass on intestate. So then the question would be, focusing first on your non-probate assets. What is it that you intend to do? Your desire could be, you want to make sure that in your absence, that smile that is in your children continues to be there, that your children will not struggle, or the lifestyle that you would probably want them to have, they would continue to have that even in your absence, and that the financial solutions that you put in place would actually provide that joy. You want to make sure that if you're also taking care of, the family members, including beneficiaries that would come on board, like your aged parents, providing for their medical care, they can be provided for. That your children continues to go to school, whether you're there or not. Your charity interests, you probably have a cause that you would want to perpetuate, that probably this cause would continue to, to progress as you go along. There are other caretaking that you would want to take care of your family. You want to ensure that your family needs continues being taken care of. Or you may have vulnerable beneficiaries that you know for the rest of your life. These beneficiaries, I would want to take care of them. And if I am not there, I would want to prepare on how they can be taken care of. So the biggest question would be, what is the most efficient way of ensuring that the financial solutions that you've laid down as part of your non-probate assets flow to actually take care of these needs that you have in place? The best way of doing that, simply setting up a trust or setting up a facility that will make sure that you can bring in accountable frameworks that will direct those financial assets into the needs that you've taken care of. I'll be defining briefly what a trust is. I'll be defining the structure of a trust, but look at it simply as a safe deposit kitty that would hold those financial assets, mostly non-probate assets, and that would direct those assets to the very specific needs of the beneficiaries that you have defined. So a trust, in a very simple perspective, is a legal person that you create with full legal rights, like a human being. That person is not owned by anyone. Just like you as a human being, you're only owned by God. But as a human being, you can own assets. You can buy, you can sell, you can benefit others. You can decide how you want to benefit so and so. A trust has a legal framework or a legal structure very similar to a human. The only advantage that you get with a trust is that it is an immortal entity. It is an immortal legal person. While we are mortal beings, I may not be guaranteed of tomorrow. But if I am not there tomorrow, I set up another immortal entity that I know whatever happens, that entity will be there. But while I am setting it up, I lay down very clear structures on how this trust would receive the assets that I would pass on to them and how they would manage it and administer the needs of the people that would want to benefit from that trust. In a nutshell, that is what a trust is. So for non-probate assets, you can actually set up a very simple trust. And it's a structure that you can actually even set it up within 5 minutes or within a day and actually define what you want to do with the legal person that you have created and how they would receive the assets that you have, either now or in the future, and how they would direct those assets to the people that you want to benefit through them. The good thing is that you can actually create a simple trust and use it now to probably even take care of some of the needs. For example, if you're talking about taking care of the education needs of your children, you can actually run that very effectively through an education trust. You can run a medical kitty for your family members, including your aged parents, through a medical trust. But now the same trust can be tied to your insurance policies, so that you say, once that policy matures, instead of it being paid to my family or even to me while I am there, let it be directed to a trust, so that now that trust, you put in structures on how it will now flow to take care of the education needs of your children, to take care of the caretaking of your family members, to take care of, the vulnerable beneficiaries that you want to provide, financial support for as you go along. So now when you come back to the probate assets, these are the assets now you literally need to do estate planning for. Because these are the assets that if you are to pass on without creating a structure for, you would now need to go, your family will not now need to go through a legal probate process. So estate planning basically is part of now handling the probate assets, and there are different frameworks that I'll talk about on how you can do that. In a simple sense, what you're doing with an estate planning is that you're creating a process that would prepare for the orderly administration and distribution of your assets during your lifetime and into the future. You're basically creating a framework, a vision of how would my estate, now the probate property or the probate assets, be held while I am still alive, and how would I create a framework of how they flow to the people that I would want to pass on them, those assets to them. So there are various laws within the country that guides that. It's probably one of the most regulated frameworks because it basically touches on every part of the fabric of the society. So all these legal frameworks would guide that. Much of what is guided in now the estate planning solutions of trust and wills is contained under the Trustees Perpetual Succession Act and the Perpetual Succession Act amendment that was done recently in 2021. But you would see conversations about the law of succession, the Land Act, because there are issues on how do you pass on the title to the other beneficiaries. The Constitution of Kenya talks about succession planning. There are aspects of the Income Tax Act. There are tax privileges that you would get as part of your succession planning, the Land Act, Trustees Act, and also other legislations like the Muslims have the Sharia law that governs how succession is done in marriages, in divorce, and probably even when you're passing down assets from one generation to the next. But they are not limited to the other structural legal framework that would guide in probably setting up trusts and all that. In fact, we've seen a lot of different practices now coming to now a more systematic framework of succession planning. Now, when you're doing your succession plan or you're planning your estates, essentially, globally, there are only two legal tools that you use in planning your estate. So if you don't plan your estate, in most cases, you would pass on what is referred to as intestate, meaning that you've actually not made very express wishes of how you would want your probate assets handled in your demise. So what happens is that your family would now go through the probate process, and the legal process will now guide or dictate on your behalf on how your estate would be passed down to your heirs. But we always encourage that we become proactive and actually plan for this. So you're either doing a will or you're doing a trust. I'll talk about two other instruments. One that has been applied by most families in this country. A lot of families have tried to create a family business or a family company. A family company is a legal term that basically defines a company that is created by shareholders who are related by virtue of being family members. So meaning that the shareholders could be probably, parents and children or siblings and all that. And the law recognizes them as family members, and that business is a family company. And there are certain privileges that are given to that. So what most families would do is that they would create a family company. Probably the anchors would maybe retain the majority of the shareholding. As Peter Wachira, I create a family company, retained 51% of the shareholding, and probably start distributing the rest of the shareholding to my children. Now, there's one big or two big risks that actually are brought about by that, if you're using that as a means of transitioning your family wealth. Number one, shareholding would still need to be passed down from your children to the other children. So meaning that you've really not completely done succession planning, because you'd keep doing that succession every time you're moving to the next generation. And you may realize that the more you start now fragmenting the shareholding, the more complex it becomes. And so that brings in one of the challenges, because it brings in now an issue of you've really not handled the transition for generational wealth. Number two, in your absence, the 51% that you retain, the court would still have to pass it down to the remaining heirs or the other shareholders. And that may be probably the beginning of probably a conflict of interest between them. But number three, in your absence, the other shareholders, your children, may now come on board as now the shareholders. And if in the unfortunate scenario that they have no idea what to do with the business, you are likely to now find a lot of conflicting decisions that are being made, because they're making those decisions as shareholders of the business. And so we always recommend that do not use a family business as a generational estate planning tool. It is useful because you can actually use it as a consolidating tool, but combine it with other shareholding structures like a trust, where the shareholding is now no longer owned by the individuals. You place that shareholding in a trust. And I will talk about that now in the governance structure that you can create. So family businesses have actually terribly failed and have actually become a trap for most families who are using that as a way of planning their estate. So there's another tool called a power of attorney. A power of attorney is a very important tool for families. Now, you cannot use a power of attorney for succession planning because a power of attorney dies with the person who gave out that power. But it can be very useful in making sure that while that person may be incapacitated to discharge certain obligations, someone is authorized to actually do that. A power of attorney basically is an authority that you give to someone else. As Peter Wachira, I have some obligations to make, and I do a power of attorney to authorize Mama BIMA to make certain decisions on my behalf. So that if I am incapacitated, and probably I am going through an operation that will probably put me in coma, and maybe I may not recover for some period, my financial decision or my family decisions do not ground to a halt. And Mama Bima, who I have authorized to probably access my bank account or make certain financial decisions on my behalf, would be able to now continue discharging that. But in case I do not survive and I pass on, that power dies with me. And Mama Bima would not be able to now continue now discharging those decisions. But it can become a very important tool in making sure that there's continuity in probably different low moments in the family system. But now, the actual tools for succession planning is only either a will or a trust. And those two tools handle them differently. So if I begin with a will is a very simple document that is basically saying that as Peter Wachira, these are the list of the assets that I own. In case I pass on, I would want asset A to go to so-and-so, asset B to go to so-and-so, asset C to go to so-and-so and all that. And what you're doing is that you're basically distributing your assets to the people that you'd want to pass on to. That is useful, but we have found it failing in many scenarios where some certain assets cannot be distributed or cannot be disintegrated for distribution. And a lot of families have actually come forward to say that we would want to hold this asset as a unit because it's a lot more valuable that way. In fact, we have seen in this country of ours, Kenya, where a lot of the family wealth has actually been lost because of our inheritance model. Because we would say, my great-grandfather had 100 acres of land. They used to have large families, probably sometimes even multiple, wives. And maybe they have 10 children. Out of their 100 acres, they distributed probably 10 acres each to each of their children. And those are my grandparents. My grandparents had also probably their 6 children who are now my parents. So out of the 10 acres passed on to them, they distributed to 6 children. So each of them is getting probably just about, less than 2 acres. So by the time it's coming to us now, who are maybe the 3rd or 4th generation, what has happened to the original 100 acres? We are now being distributed probably half an acre or a quarter. You realize that because of that inheritance model, the value that would have been built from the 100 acres is almost impossible to build from their quarter or 1 acre that has now been passed down by Gen 3. And so a lot of families are realizing that and saying, no, we actually do not want to continue with this inheritance model. What legal framework can we put together to now ensure that we can hold their 100 acres, bring value together as a family, unlock a lot more value, and possibly by the time it's getting to 4th, 5th generation, instead of having 100 acres, you probably have 1,000 acres, or you probably have other subsidiary assets that are compensating the 100 acres if the acreage has not grown. But the value being generated, like the Kokfa family that I was talking about, is a lot more than what any one family member can unlock from 1 acre. And that is what a will has not managed to do. Now, there are 2 types of wills. You can do a will orally, or you can do it as a written will. An oral will is recognized by law if it is made by the testator or the person who wants to pass on that wealth to the other generations in front of at least 2 witnesses. Now, the caveat is that that oral will expires if that person does not die within 3 months. Meaning that if you're doing an oral will, you'd have to keep redoing it every 3 months. Otherwise, after 3 months, it becomes invalid. It is only valid for people who are probably in active military duty, because the law recognizes that that person may not be back home and they may not know probably when they'll be back home. So we always advocate for, if you're doing a will, do it as a written will, because now that one is valid for as long as it has not been updated, or it has not been cancelled. Now, from a legal perspective, anyone can actually write down their wishes in a will. But the challenge usually is that there are a lot of gaps that you may not know of that becomes a trap in executing that will in the probate course. So in as much as anyone can actually do a will, we always advocate that use the legal system or the legal professionals to actually help you draft your will, because they would guide you on some of the traps that most other families may actually go through. And it will probably make sure that your will is actually very solid, and it will be almost honored, to the letter when it goes through the probate course. But now, in a scenario where you do not want to do a will and you want to now set up a more stable structure that facilitates the preservation of the family wealth across generations, that's where now trusts come in. Now, before 2021, the year 2021, when the update of the Trustees Perpetual Succession Act was done through Parliament, we didn't have a very clear system of trusts. A lot of families were creating trusts, but those trusts were not any different from maybe a trust for protecting elephants, or a trust for protecting the environment, or rhinos, or a trust as a foundation for charity and all that. But the update in 2021 brought in something that was so significant to the families by clarifying a specific trust created for the purposes of holding and preserving family assets. And they named that as a family trust. So that family trust, yes, takes the form of any other trust, but it's very special because it is very specific for holding family assets and transitioning those family assets to future generations. And that laid the foundation for now subsequent legislative updates that happened the same year, specifically to the tax framework, where they said now, for a family that has created a family trust, you have certain tax advantages that you would get. For example, some of the tax advantages would be, if you have created a trust and you're moving your assets from yourself to the trust, you would not incur stamp duty then, or you would not incur capital gains tax. A lot of costs that were quite, punitive before then, and were discouraging families for probably transitioning, because it would be seen as, if you have created a trust and you're moving your assets into a trust, it's as if you're selling those assets to a third party. Now, family trust laid the foundation for the framework of now making sure that families can now do that. Now, there are different types of trusts, and what I'll be talking about is what is referred to as an express trust. In our daily life, there are other implied trusts that you do. For example, the house help that you have within your house, when you're living there with your children, that's a trust relationship that you have with them. But it's an implied trust. There are certain ways within which they're supposed to manage your house and take care of your family. But in most cases, you do not probably put down very specific rules on how they do that. So it's an implied trust. So what you're talking about is express trusts that you actually clearly express on how your probate assets would be passed down to your generations. So there are essentially two ways of doing that. You can do that as a testamentary trust. A testamentary trust is a trust that is created after you pass on. So that is a trust that is, in most cases, created through a will. So you do a will and you'd say, instead of the executors distributing those assets to my children, I would want them to create a trust for the benefit of the specific beneficiaries that I would name. So the trust becomes operational after your death. The alternative would be to create a living trust. A living trust is a trust that you create today. It starts operating today. You transfer the ownership of the assets that you have to that trust, that legal person, and you are in control of how that legal person operates that trust. Because it's a living trust, it gives you a lot of opportunities. It gives you a lot of powers. So it can be created as a revocable trust or as irrevocable trust. What those terms basically means is that if it's a revocable trust, is that you can create a trust today, pass on an asset to the trust, but later on, legally, you can now remove the assets and the trust now sort of becomes in existence. But irrevocable trust means that you're creating a trust, passing on those assets to that trust, and by law, you have no intentions of pulling the assets back to yourself. We always advocate for creating a living trust because it gives you a lot of opportunity to basically lay the foundation for generational vision. Because as a living trust and as the creator of the living trust, you're the only one who has the power to mature it. There's some things that when you're creating a trust, you may not be able to expressly put down on the document that creates a trust known as a trust deed and rules. But as a living trust, because you're the one who is setting the rules of the trust, you're the only one who has the power to amend those rules. Meaning that it gives you an opportunity to now mature the structural operation of the trust. So that if you look at the framework that you have created and you realize that there's a specific clause that I've put in the trust deed and rules that says that is likely to probably be abused by the parties involved in the management of the trust. I'll talk about those parties as trustees. Then you have the opportunity of tightening that rule. Or you say that there's a clause that I have put in that may be too tight and may probably trouble my beneficiaries in the future. You have the opportunity of refining that to a more palatable framework. Meaning that over time, if you walk the journey with the trust for, let's say, 20, 10, 30, 50 years before you pass on, you would have refined that framework so well in such a way that it becomes now a smooth transition into the future. And living trust gives you that huge opportunity. Now, a trust essentially has three basic fundamentals. Any trust that you can think about begins with a purpose. You're saying, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to achieve with the framework that I am creating? So you have that down. For family wealth transition, the purpose would be, my purpose would be to pass on this wealth to the next generation. Or I would want to make sure that I create a framework on how this wealth would be held, managed, and transition across the generation line. That's a very clear purpose. The other element is that you must have an asset because a trust cannot operate without any assets that it's using to actually achieve the purpose that you have defined. So you have to define what is it that you're placing in that trust. Part of it may be that you're actually saying that I want to continue building up, on the foundation that I have laid down to make sure that the asset continues to grow. Or others, maybe you want to expressly now hand over the assets, change the title of the land from your name to the name of the trust. The number 3 element is that you must define who benefits from those assets. You must define who draws the purpose, draws the value through the purpose that you have intended to achieve from the assets that you have placed in trust. So if you're saying that I want my children to benefit from the trust that I have created, then the trust will now create structures to ensure that that purpose is achieved in the life of those beneficiaries. Now, the beneficiaries may be expressly named persons, or they may be conditional persons, where you've probably said that any person who meets certain criteria is a beneficiary. For example, if you're setting up a charity trust and you're probably saying, I want to set up a trust that provides education for poor children within my village, then you have defined that as the purpose, and that condition would probably qualify that poor child to become a beneficiary in your charity trust that you have established. Or you may say that I want to establish a family trust, and the beneficiary may be anyone born in the lineage of Peter Wachira. So that now, even 300 years down the line, as long as the beneficiaries can actually prove that they're actually born through my bloodline, they would automatically become beneficiaries of my family trust. So that is how you establish that framework. Now, the basic structure of a trust looks like this. Any trust, but I can focus more on both the simple trust that I talked about in distributing the non-probate assets, the financial assets that you have, but also the family trust. So you are there as the founder, called asset law. You desire to utilize the assets that you have to meet certain causes or to meet certain objectives. So what you do is that you create a legal entity, this box known as a trust. And the creation involves documenting some set of rules that would guide the life of this entity and the operational framework or the governance framework of this entity. This document is known as a trust deed and rules. So you will create that entity and incorporate it. Then you would pass on the ownership of the assets that you previously owned to the trust. Basically, what you have done, remember I talked previously of probate assets and non-probate assets. For the probate assets, if you do not pass them on to the trust, it means that in your absence, the law would pass them through the probate process or through the legal process. But once you've created a trust and you've passed on the ownership of the trust, the assets to the trust, it means that you've stopped being the owner of those assets. So that now, when you pass on, there is never a gap in the ownership of those assets, because the assets are already owned by the legal person. And what would happen is that that legal person will just continue existing and managing your assets as by your definition. So that's why you now put down this document known as a trust deed and rule, and then you pass on the assets to the trust. But now within that trust, you have a structural framework. You would name the trustee that you would want to manage the trust. That trustee may be either individuals or maybe a professional entity, like a corporate trustee that would be appointed as an institutional trustee to manage the trust on your behalf. And then you would have defined who the beneficiaries would be. Those beneficiaries would be probably some children that you want to support as a charity cause, your family members, you're not there, so you want to make sure that your family members continue to benefit. You also want to make sure that, certain Medicare, caretaking, education, or whatever benefit that you want to pass on continues to be passed on. And you will have defined that within the trust deed and rules, and you would have laid the foundation of how the trustees would actually utilize the assets that you passed on to them to meet this need. So the structure now, especially in the family trust, has an entity of an independent overseer of the trust called an enforcer. That was brought in 2021 when the law was being updated, or probably you can call that person a protector. The principle is that that person is not a trustee. They may be a beneficiary, but they should not be a trustee because their role is to basically oversee the trustee. and they have been given legal powers to actually overhaul the trustee if there is legal reason that they have to say that the trustees are actually not discharging their mandate as per the instructions that the founder actually set up. So before the setup of this office, the court system was actually the enforcer. But now the courts have delegated that into an enforcer that the settler can appoint or can define on how that office comes to be. Because remember that this trust may exist for hundreds of years after the lifetime of the settlor. So they can actually define a condition on how that enforcer would be created and how they operate together with the trustees to oversee the structure of that. For most families usually have a family council. So that family council can actually act very efficiently as the enforcer of your family trust, assuming that you have created other members of the family members who are not part of the family council as trustees, or you have appointed an entity, let's say like ICEA Lion Trust Company, as your corporate trustee, but being overseen by the family council as your enforcers of your trust. So generally, this is the basic structure of a trust. It's a very simple structure, but very powerful. So how do you set up a trust? The process, surprisingly, is very simple. It's only a two-step process. So the first process is where you're actually setting up the trust agreement. That's where you're actually establishing the legal person that you're talking about. You're establishing that entity. And you'll put down now the letter of wishes and register that or incorporate it as a legal document that guides the setup of the trust and the operational framework that the trust must operate through. Once you have set up that and you've registered it, it's now a legal entity. The next step is simply to transfer the assets into the trust, funding the trust. Now, practically in Kenya, this is the process that that takes. So you begin by, of course, laying down your letter of wishes. And we will, an estate planner would guide you on drafting your trust deed and rules. This is actually one of the most important elements because you're basically laying down what I normally call your family wealth vision. You're putting it down on paper. You're defining on who are you? Who are the people around you? What is the estate that you're talking about? At the point of setting up the trust, you actually don't have to name the assets, but you can actually lay down the foundation because anyway, the assets may morph over the years. So who would be the initial trustees? You're basically laying that foundation and you want it to be as consultative as possible to represent exactly what you desire. Because just as we are all different, every family is different. And so the trust deed that you would create has to be very closely as a representative of your interest or your family interest as possible, as we can. So once you've drafted that document, you would now execute it, and then it goes to the trust registry, which is currently housed under the Ministry of Lands and Planning. So two things would happen. That document would be registered as a legal document under the Document Registry Act. It would also be stamped. The stamping is just a minimal stamp. You only pay about 240 shillings to do that. Then you would go ahead and do what is known as a petition for incorporation. And you would incorporate that trust as a legal entity. So that now, the trust would operate in its own name and you'd get a certificate of incorporation. Just like the way you'd get a certificate of incorporation for a company, you also get a certificate of incorporation for a trust to represent now that trust is a fully registered legal persona as an incorporated entity. After that, now the next step would be to now transfer the assets into the trust. And you'd be transferring those assets in the name of the trust. This is so fundamental because, as I said earlier, you would have already handled the probate process. It means that in your demise, this trust now lays the foundation on how the stability of the family wealth now flows into the future. And you may never see a scenario where your family goes to court for family wealth distribution or anything, because you've already defined that. Let me also say that while creating a trust, there may be some assets that you may not be able to transfer into the trust. For example, your personal bank account, in most cases, you may not transfer it into the trust, or your personal items like your jewelry, your ring, and all that. So in most cases, we normally advise that as you're creating a trust, create also a will that may handle both the assets before they move into the trust, but also those personal assets that may practically not move into the trust until you pass on. And so that will now becomes now a testamentary will that after your demise, now those assets, that will guide on how those assets would either move into the trust or they would move to specific people that you may have defined. But that will may also protect your interest for future assets that you may acquire, and your intention is to move them into the trust, and they have not yet moved into the trust. All right. So once you have created a trust, there are several parties that, as I mentioned, that are involved in that. There is a trust, the settler or the settlor, that is you. There is a trustee, that is the person who by law is now mandated to now receive the governance structure of the trust, sometimes even receive the assets and manage the assets in line with the trust deed and rules. So you can appoint a trustee as individuals or as a corporate body. There are a lot of advantages and disadvantages that lies to either. So when we are guiding families on their estate planning journey, we always try to make it as practical as possible. In fact, it is possible for you to appoint yourself as the creator of the trust, as a trustee. In fact, we recommend that for one specific purpose, that you are the vision carrier of the family wealth. And there are some things that you may not write down in the trust deed and rules that probably either a professional trustee or other individual trustees may not know. But in the course of operating or managing the trust, you bring on board some of those intentions or desires into the practical operation of the trust. So we always advocate, once you have created a trust, and that's the reason why I would guide that you create a trust as a living trust. You may want to appoint yourself as a trustee. So that now, as a trustee, you're wearing the hat of not as a settler, but as a trustee. If there's a decision that is beyond the scope of the trustee, it is a living trust. So you can remove the hat of the trustee and wear the hat of the settlor, and probably now make that decision as a settlor or as a founder of the trust. Now, the other composition of the trustee would be, you can create, you can appoint family members as a trustee. You can hire professionals as trustees, or even personal friends as trustees. But the rule of thumb usually is, you want to understand the value that whoever you're creating as a trustee is bringing to the vision that you're creating. Remember, that trusteeship may run for hundreds of years after your lifetime. So part of the things that you may want to put down is on conditions on any individuals that would come on board as a trustee. How would they be qualified to be as trustees? What qualifications would they need to meet? Would you want to probably lay down some, minimum skill sets that they need to have to be as trustees? Or sometimes you may put it condition that they may be family members, because you want probably absolute loyalty in that. But you may also appoint an institution as a trustee, as a professional trustee. One of the biggest advantages you get in appointing an institution is that you're bringing in now capacity that individuals may not have in the operations of the trust, because an institution brings on board now professional capacity, probably even skill sets or lessons that they have learned from other trusts that they have been running into your family trusts.
I would always recommend that you actually create some sort of a hybrid where you are the trustee. You probably have other individuals by virtue of probably how well they understand the trustee and probably the value that they're bringing on board. And also you appoint an institution because of the capacity that they're bringing on board. The institution may also be a very valuable, probably mediator in the case that probably the other individual trustees disagree. The advantage of an institution would be that probably they may not have any interest besides the value that they're providing to the family trust, but they may also protect you by virtue of they are a corporate body. They have an internal governance structure. If Peter Wachira, as the CEO of the trust company, the trust company is a trustee, it's not Peter Wachira who is a trustee. But Peter Wachira reports to a board of directors. But there's probably a division within the entity that probably handles that. But as an entity, we may be handling probably thousands of other trusts, meaning that you're protected from any conflicts of interest that may be there in the individual trustees. A company may not have that because their interest may be to protect the brand of the company, to protect the reputation of the company in providing that service, and to probably make sure that the company continues as a going concern. So that hybrid framework, to me, from a practical perspective, seems to be a very logical. Obviously, it may come at a cost because you need to pay a fee to the institutional trustee. You may also need to pay a fee to probably the other individual trustees. Sometimes it may be a sitting allowance when probably the trustees are sitting together to make certain decisions. Or it may be, if it's a professional trustee, you're also probably also paying them a fee as a professional trustee in running that. So generally, what are we saying? That when you're creating family wealth or a framework, you're basically creating a vision of a legacy. We know that we will not be there for many years, but our desire is that we can actually create a structure or create something that may outlive us, that may probably even live forever. Today, trusts can now survive for eternity. In fact, there is no term limit within which a trust can operate. Before, I think 2 years back, family trust could only operate for 80 years and then you roll it over into a new trust. But today, you can actually set up a foundation that can actually run for many generations. The rule of thumb, and I think the practice usually is, you want to establish something that may actually outlive at least 7 generations. Because you know, by that foundation, by the 7th generation, the knowledge and the system and the culture within the family system would have been established so well in such a way that you would be guaranteed of it flowing now for many generations after that. And you can actually also create a mother trust that is probably within the current generation. And as now other families are coming on board down the generation line, you can create sub-trusts that connect to the mother trust. So that now you're creating a framework or a system that becomes now sustainable. But you're also empowering generations that are coming under you to now also create their own legacies, but also drawing a lot of value and a lot of capacity from the original framework that you have created. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the vision that we wanted to share with you in sharing or crafting a framework that you can actually create and structure your family wealth that would flow beyond generations. I would want to stop there, but we would want to engage with you, probably to provide more information. This time, or probably 2 or 3 hours, may not be enough for us to actually give all the knowledge. Would you like to hear more about trust and estate planning? Please write to us. You can do an email. I would request that you title that email Mama BIMA Trust Masterclass. And you can send that email to mamabima@places.co.ke. or you can send that to trustcompany@icealion.com, and we'll be sure to get back to you with more information. Thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to actually respond to some of the questions that you may have out of the conversation. Back to you, Mama BIMA.
Peter, receive your flowers. I should be having flowers in my hands. Receive your flowers. Thank you very much for taking us through that amazing presentation. I feel that this class was aptly titled as a masterclass, and we marketed it as a masterclass, and we actually had a master as our instructor in today's session. In the run-up to the masterclass, I asked our participants what motivated them to attend, this session. And 3 of the key responses, like the 3 themes that kept repeating themselves in the responses, one was a desire for knowledge. A lot of people wanted to get into this class and learn about trusts and estate planning. And I feel that, even for the participants, I would love to see your feedback on the chats. Utilize the wall, tell us how that presentation was. It's good that we give Peter his flowers. I feel that we have ticked that. Thank you so much for that knowledge, and you presented it with so much clarity and passion. Number 2, there was a predominant concern to ensure financial security and well-being of their children. And I think that journey is starting. In my day-to-day work, I have realized that a lot of Kenyans are very engaged in this particular topic of estate planning, how to set up a trust. And even if it is not the big living trust or the big family trust, even how to set up a trust fund, and just how amazed and excited they get when they realize even with 5,000 shillings, I'm able to set up a trust fund. And this trust fund can be my official, quote unquote, like next of kin, in my life policies. At work, my next of kin that I give to my, say, employer. Okay. So, and also now the third motivation I got from our participants, they have witnessed chaotic succession cases. Okay. And they have this interest now to plan ahead. Okay. And I feel from today's session, I know a lot of us were asking when the session was going on, will this be recorded? Will you get to share it with you? Yes. This masterclass is being recorded. And since we have your email addresses, we will get to share the recording with you once it's made available. Now, I want us to move into a Q&A. Peter, you could have a glass of water because we do have questions for you. And if you've been checking the Q&A sort of like chat box, I want to appreciate there has been some great work happening there. A lot of questions being dropped there. And Susan Mathenge, Jane Munyori, and Nahashon Moiruri have been amazing. They've been responding to the queries in real time. So thank you very much for that. Susan, Jane, and Nahashon. Now, Peter, you could probably take these questions, maybe in 3. And the first question we want to pose to you is, how can I set up okay. And I know you alluded to this during the masterclass, but please don't tire maybe to repeat. How can I set up a trust, and what are the costs involved? And what are the costs of maintaining a trust? Okay, so question 1, how can I set up a trust, and what are the costs involved in the setting up process? And what are the costs of maintaining that trust? Number 2, can a trust be contested in court? Okay, and number 3, can I set up a trust in Kenya if I reside in a different country? I know Nahashon has responded to this very much in the Q&A chat box, but Peter, for the benefit of all participants, we would want to hear, can I set up a trust in Kenya if I reside abroad? And what is that process like? So you could take those and then we take another 3.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mama BIMA. So the process of setting up a trust is actually very simple, as I said earlier. See if I can quickly go back to that. So this is the practical process in Kenya. You're beginning by, of course, creating that intention. You want to set up the trust, and we'll go through this process, as I mentioned. So you start by creating a trust deed and rules. Now, within ICEA Lion Trust Company, if you come to us, and I know you may probably even engage your lawyer to actually create a trust, they would guide you in the process of documenting the trust deed and rules. So you would document that, they would discuss with you, guide you on probably the thought process around that, and you'd come up with a document and make sure that you say as much as you want. Expressly say exactly what your wishes would be in creating that trust. Your wishes around the transfer of your assets. Then, of course, that trust deed would be executed. You'd sign it. It would go through the trust registry all the way to incorporation. Ordinarily, out of practice, we have seen the timeline that you would take would be anything between 4 months to 6 months on average. Before then, it used to take a very long time. It could even take probably more than a year or even 2 in creating a trust. But the bulk of that is actually the conversation on the thought process on what you're trying to put down. So currently, and I know that has been responded on the Q&A, our cost structure is in 3 aspects. And I will respond to that, connecting with the second question on how much does it cost. So setting up a trust, we have a standard cost of 350,000. That 350,000 will actually now handle all the consultation, the legal process, the documentation of the trust deed and rule, all the way to incorporation, including the disbursements. Now, beyond the trust creation, we also guide families on any legal review that we may need to do on the asset structures that you have. In fact, one of the rule of thumb and advisory that I would give is that if you look at us as Kenyans, we probably may have assets all over. Sometimes they may not be physical assets. It may be probably your financial solutions. You have probably your pension account in every company that you ever worked for. And by that time you're retiring, you have like almost, so many pension funds all over, or your insurance policies all over, all plots, because we are in a circle system. You have a plot in Kamulu, a plot in, Kiambu, Kisumu, Naivasha, all over. So one of the things that we normally advocate for is that, number one, list down that asset structure. Because I find it usually interesting that most of us have a big problem actually remembering where all our assets are. Imagine how much trouble your heirs would actually have in your absence in actually listing them out. But we normally help, once you have listed them out, we would probably now go ahead and do a legal review so that you can actually unpack, are there some assets that needs to be handled, in a certain way to prepare them to flow into the trust? Are there some assets that are jointly owned and you would want to handle that joint ownership? Are there some land that is probably only on allotment paper, it has not been titled, and you need to title it, so that you can actually prepare all those assets to flow into the trust? We normally do a legal review at a cost of 50,000. There are situations where if we see that the asset structure is really not complex, we can do that for you free of charge. So the much of the cost would be on the creation of the trust, which is 350,000, a legal review, which is another 50,000. And because, as I mentioned, we would also encourage that you also do a will. We also do a will at a standard cost of 50,000 plus VAT. But obviously, we normally guide on a payment structure that is very accommodative, because we know that this process may take probably about 6 months.
you can spread that payment over a 6 months period. So that's how much it costs. Can a trust be contested in court? Anyone can go to court and lodge any case in court. I always say that there's someone who actually went to court and sued the Roman government because they crucified Jesus. Anyone can go to court for anything. The question usually is, can that case even stand? Can you win if you take a trust court? The straight answer is you are likely not to win. In fact, there's no court in this world that can actually unpack the creation of a trust, because the person who created the trust is probably not the one going to court. You're basically challenging their intentions. So the only thing that the court can do is probably look at the management of the trust and say, are the trustees discharging their roles as per the trust deed and rules? And the court can actually authorize the removal of the trustee and reappointment of others. But they cannot dismantle the trust framework. And that's why a trust becomes so powerful in protecting your interests. So that now the probate process moves from probate distribution through a probate process in court into a process that has already been handled, and the court system may probably support in strengthening that, but protecting your intentions and your interest. So the question usually is, can you win a case if you actually took a trust to court? In most probably, you may not. In fact, there's almost no case that has ever been won where someone wants to dismantle a trust that has been created, and it gives you the powers to actually decide on who exactly do you want. And a lot more power to probably even say that I do not want this person to benefit from the trust, probably have benefited them, in different ways. That person cannot come and actually now say, I was not included in the trust and I want to be included. The court has no powers to do that. I hope that is clear. As a foreigner, can I create a trust? Yes, you can create a trust. Just like the way as a foreigner, you can actually own assets anywhere. You can actually create a trust and run your portfolio here in Kenya as a foreigner. And this actually is probably another tip that I can give you. In Kenya, and like probably most other countries, much of the hard assets, especially land, only locals or only Kenyans can actually own land as a freehold. If you transition that land to a foreigner, it immediately converts into a leasehold. Meaning that if you're a foreigner and you want to own freehold land, you need to create a legal owner locally. And that legal owner would most probably be either a company or a trust. But you see, a company, the legal process will be looking for the ultimate beneficiary. And so the only avenue would be to probably create a trust, and you own your local assets through that trust. That way, you'll be able to probably now protect your interest and probably even accommodate the local legal system very well. And even as a foreigner residing in Kenya, you can actually create a trust here, and it may provide a lot of benefits, especially tax benefits that are connected to your country of origin. Because what would happen is that, yes, you would create your trust, transition your assets into that trust, you stop being the owners of that trust, meaning that any returns that you're doing to your country, you would not now be obligated to do returns on the assets that you have transitioned to the trust because you have changed the ownership. The only returns you can give is on the benefit that you're drawing from your trust. Obviously, you may need to declare that you are a beneficiary of a trust and you have created a trust, but you basically remove a lot of other reporting obligations by protecting the ownership away from you into now another legal person, which is the trust. Maybe there's a question that I've not responded to, Mama BIMA, on. What does it cost to maintain a trust? I believe that question is, if you're appointing a corporate trustee, what kind of fees would you charge? you'd be surprised that the cost is actually fairly minimal, as low as little as 0.3% of the value of your portfolio. The maximum that you'd see in the market, especially within our structure, is that it's a maximum of 1% of the value of the assets within the trust per annum. But the bigger the portfolio, the cheaper it gets, because there are economies of scale that you benefit from the bigger portfolio. Thank you.
Peter, on the other question, the second last question, you answered on how a foreigner can actually set up a trust in Kenya, but also tell us, when the session was starting, we got to see Kenyans who joined this masterclass from California, from Denver. For those Kenyans who are in the diaspora, can they set up a trust here at home? And how would you support them to do that? Basically, is this a process that can also be done like digitally online if they're not present in Kenya?
Yes. In fact, the process of creating a trust is actually one of the easiest processes because you see, the bulk of it is actually the documentation. We've had a lot of Kenyans living abroad create trust with us, and we have coordinated to make sure that those conversations are happening. You are able to do that virtually. And probably I can extend this conversation into saying, besides even the family trusts, our Kenyans living in the diaspora can actually set up a trust to achieve in a much accountable way some of the support that you extend back to your families back here. I mean, I think we have a lot of Kenyans supporting their families back here, but the question usually is, if I am sending monies to my family for education and all that, does that money go to take care of education? Are there chances that a lot of that is diverted to other needs? You can use a trust very effectively to actually direct that support to education. Because you see, what a trust does is that if you send that money to the education of Peter Wachira, the trust will not pay the parent of Peter Wachira or the guardian of Peter Wachira. The guardian's role would be to facilitate, to give information on where is the school fee supposed to be paid. Then the trust pays directly to that, creating a very accountable system to do that. If it's Medicare that you're providing to your families back home, you can create a trust and say that this trust is specifically for medical needs. What the trust will do is that instead of sending the monies to the family, it will now be working with the family to make sure that anytime a child is hospitalized or goes to hospital, the trust directly liaises with the hospital to clear the medical bill, or even probably maintains the medical cover that the family may use on a regular basis. So it becomes a very effective tool for actually supporting or providing the benefit that you're extending back home. But you can also utilize it for your own personal growth. There are investments that you want to make back home. You don't want scenarios of you sent the money to your uncle to build that apartment for you, your neighbor's project. The trust can actually oversee your investments locally and probably even provide a lot more guidance on maybe a lot other options that you may not have visibility of because you're out of the country and the corporate trustee problem may be locally here. In a way that you're able to actually even track how your trust portfolio is taking care of your purposes, and you can even get consistent, feedback on certain aspects that you want to oversee while you're away, and the trust will be able to give you that oversight in a very efficient way.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I think we can now take 5 questions, then we close. We can start with 2 and with 3. As you take these questions, Peter, there's a request by Maxine. Please reshare the slide that has the email details. And I think today's presentation was really exciting, Peter. I haven't seen a Prezi presentation in a very long time. Thank you very much for that touch of, I think this masterclass had all the bells and whistles. When I think of what a masterclass should be like, this has really surpassed even my expectations. Now, to the next question. How often can one change a trust? I'm thinking update a trust based on acquiring more assets not listed previously. I hope that's clear. And number two, and this is also a query I encounter a lot, Peter. Have there been incidences where a corporate trustee has gone under? And in such a case, what happens? So how is the wealth, the family wealth, protected in such an incident?
All right, thank you. How often can one change the trust or probably update or onboard other assets? As often as you desire. A trust is one of the most flexible structures. There is no express rules on, especially as a living trust, on how often you can actually keep refining the trust deed and rules. What happens is that you have the original trust deed and rules that has been incorporated. You would update the trust using a deed of amendment that would also be registered, and the trustee would probably support on the registration of that. Now, the onboarding of assets, that one is as often as any new assets that you acquire. And you can also issue instructions to the trust to probably sell off some assets that you want to dispose of, but also to also buy others. In fact, we have seen scenarios where you're even better off if you have a trust. Instead of buying that property directly, you can actually benefit more by buying it through the trust. Because currently, trusts are exempt from stamp duty. So meaning that if you're buying it directly, you'd have to pay some stamp duty. But if you buy it through the trust, you can actually be exempted from some of the costs of acquiring that property. So as often as possible, as often as you have a new property, onboard it to the trust, because you want to make sure that that asset is protected within the trust environment as early as possible. So if you have a corporate trustee, or let me probably even extend this into individual trustees. If the individual trustees, because they are human being, passes on, what happens to your trust? So this makeup of the trust usually is that within your trust deed and rules, you've already created clauses on the succession of the trustee. Meaning that if a trustee passes on, the remaining trustee or the family can easily be guided through the trust deed and rules on who comes on board as a trustee. You can name that as expressly named persons, or, as I said earlier, as a condition that the trustee needs to meet. You probably want someone who has some level of financial knowledge, they have probably attained a certain age, or they have some qualification that would actually add value to the trustee, to the trusteeship. If you have an institutional trustee, and that institution winds up, what happens to my trust and the assets within the trust? What happens is basically that the trust would be taken over by another trustee. The assets that you hold in trust are not assets of the trustee. In fact, the way trusts are managed, the balance sheet of your trust is very different from the balance sheet of the trustee. So what the trustee is doing, whether they are individuals or institutions, they are basically providing a service. And you can easily remove them if they are not performing the role that you expect them to do, and easily appoint another trustee without disrupting the structure of the trust assets. Meaning that if a corporate trustee, and assuming that that corporate trustee is the sole corporate trustee of your trust, if they were to wind up, part of their winding up process would be to hand over their portfolio of businesses that they are supporting to probably another trustee. So you would never get a scenario where you're losing a cent because you have appointed an entity as a corporate trustee, because that entity would never recognize your assets as part of your balance sheet. They are basically providing service to your independent entity.
Thank you very much. And when Peter started this masterclass, he alluded to the fact that there'll be a giveaway. And I think this is the point where now we pose the question. Nyokabi, I'd like to confirm that the webinar chat is still open, because I can see most of the discussions now are happening within the Q&A. If the chat box is closed, please, if you can open it so that we get more people to participate. And I hope you are ready. Let me drop a hi and just confirm that the webinar wall is on. Yes. I think you can see my hi. And here goes the question. And I think this one, only the early birds, you know, the ones who got in very fast will get to walk away. So in terms of the package that we are giving, we're extending a notebook and a pen from ICEA Lion. And I, as Mama BIMA, will throw in a Mama BIMA branded umbrella. This is the rainy season. I do not want you to be rained on. So yes, I hope you're ready. On your marks, get set, go. Here is the question. According to the Guinness World Book of Records, the longest running and active family business has been running for how many years? According to the Guinness World Book of Records, the longest running active family business has been running for how many years? So we'll be picking 3 correct answers. Oh my God, that was so fast. Wow. And on my end, allow me, oof, it's still running. Yes, allow me to pick the people who are right on it. Phoebe, you are so close. June, you are so close. That I see Simoshiri. Simoshiri, you are right on the money. Congratulations. Wendy, you're right on the money. Congratulations. It's actually 717 years. And that family business is on its 46th generation. And we were told, actually, that family business is in Japan. Is that it, Peter? Please, you could nod. Yes. And by the way, another quick fact, Peter mentioned that out of the top 10, in the top 10 list of the longest running family businesses and active family businesses, Japan actually has 6 of them. Okay, so I think it really talks a lot about maybe their culture and how they're able to transfer their wealth and bring in the younger generations into the, that family wealth setup. So we have Simoshiri who got it, Wendy Akumu, you've also won. And lastly, our third winner is Alexander Ndemwa. Wow, Alex, congratulations. So for all the winners, Alex, Wendy, and Simoshiri, please contact me after this. And in the coming week, we'll get to avail your goodie pack. And thank you so much to everyone who has participated, in this. So we go now to the last round of questions, Peter. And I really do know that these questions, we can never exhaust the questions on trusts and estate planning in one class. And the normal, how we usually have these engagements, even with my clients, is we usually book a meeting with the ICEA Lion Trust Company trust consultants. I'll tell you, if you are following the discussions in the Q&A, you will notice they are on point. They understand their stuff. So whether we'll be sitting with Susan or with Jane or with Nahashon and many others in the team, we are able to book a meeting for you where now you come in and you have an exhaustive discussion, whether virtually or in person. Okay, so if you feel that your question is not responded to in this session, please note after this, in the coming week, we'll get now to also liaise with the trust team at ICEA Lion, and now you can also have your one-on-one. Okay, so now Peter, please tell us. There's a very good question that has come in from Gabriella Evelyn Chep, and she asks, what are the disadvantages? Okay, what disadvantages are there when you set up a trust? How does a living trust affect your day-to-day transactions while your assets are under trust? Okay, please allow me to repeat that. What disadvantages are there when you set up a trust? How does a living trust affect your day-to-day transactions while your assets are under or are within the trust? Question number 2, please take 3 of these. Would you recommend a revocable or irrevocable trust? And if I choose, now this is still the participant. If I choose a revocable trust, can I be charged for making changes to the trust? Okay. And lastly, Peter, can the trust be the owner of a company so that company income will then belong to the trust? And will this income be subject to income tax? So there are so many questions on matters tax. And I know you've mentioned to us that if you acquire a property through the trust, you're exempt from, stamp duty. So as you answer this question on income tax, please, maybe you could also just elaborate a little bit on the tax implications when it comes to a trust. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mama BIMA. What disadvantages do you get when creating a trust? I think the only disadvantage you have is that you would have to now manage the assets through the trust. For example, if you have placed a company in a trust, you would not sell that company directly. You'd have to now engage the trustees to actually now sell it. But besides that, everything else actually is more a protection framework that you're creating for yourself. So there are actually a lot more advantages and probably almost no disadvantages, especially if you want to make sure that there's absolute transparency, and especially when you're now having a conversation around wealth transition. The trust actually gives you a lot more than any other solution that can give you. So the only disadvantage that I can think of is that, and it's connected to that question of how does a trust affect transactions? If you have created a trust and you have placed your assets into that trust and you want to handle some transaction with that, how does that affect? It actually doesn't affect any transaction. The only thing is probably certain things would be overseen through the trust. So for example, if you have a company, and this is now coming to the last question on can a trust own a company? If you have a family business, and that family business is probably owned by you or your family as the shareholders, what you do is that once you have created a family trust, you move the entire shareholding to the trust so that the trust now becomes the sole shareholder of your family business. But that does not disrupt the operations of the family business, because the family business, being a corporate entity, would continue to run through the board and the management. What you're creating is that you're creating a shareholder, and you're also creating a framework where that shareholder's interest is at the level of the shareholding interest. You may also putting a framework where the trustee probably also participate in the director appointments. So that now the trustee continues being informed on how this company is run, and they draw value and the knowledge on what your intentions of the continuity of the company is, so that in your absence, they can continue to oversee that. But a trust would not disrupt the operations of your assets. The company will continue to run as it is. What you may benefit on is on revenue that you want to now flow back to the trust as the shareholder. And that may give you a lot of advantages. Like that question has asked on certain tax benefits, because trusts are exempt from corporate income tax. In as much as a trust is set up as a corporate body, as a legal persona, they are not subject to corporate tax. So if you have revenues that are coming from the assets, and that revenue is flowing back into the trust will not be expected to pay any taxes. But at the asset level, for example, if you have rental incomes that you're earning rent, you'd still pay your rental income tax. But now the final tax would go to the trust. If you have probably a business that you're running, the business will still run its normal taxes. But once you distribute that revenue in form of dividends to the trust will not be expected to pay income tax on that dividend. But the tax conversation is usually much wider, because you want to expand it into actually looking at who are the beneficiaries. Do they have certain tax obligations or certain tax advantages? Which assets are we talking about? You're talking about rental income. You're talking about, bonds holdings that you're earning, investment income on. You're talking about a company that you're earning revenue on. So that conversation is usually a much wider conversation, because we want to actually make it very practical to actually lay out the map into beneficiaries. Who are they? Do you have, disabled beneficiaries who are exempt from certain taxes? Do you have beneficiaries, and how are you paying that benefit? Are you paying a medical benefit that may be fully exempt from tax? Are you paying an education benefit that may be fully exempt from tax? Are you paying an income benefit? And what benefits are tied to, if you're paying an income benefit to the beneficiaries, are there limits of tax benefit that you get out of that? Where is this revenue coming from? So we would be able to now unpack those different aspects so that you can now have a holistic conversation on taxes. So there's the basic conversation about now movement of the assets from yourself into the trust. Currently, what we have is that if you're moving hard properties, you do not incur capital gains tax on that movement. If there are assets that you're moving into the trust that would be subject to stamp duty, the trust will be exempt from paying stamp duty on the receipt of those assets. But of course, there will be a lot other tax conversations that will be dependent on the day-to-day running of the trust. So the final question is on revocable or non-revocable. If I create a revocable trust, would I be charged in making any changes on that? The answer is a straight no. Ideally, a revocable trust would be applicable in what I talked about, handling non-probate assets, mostly financial assets. You're creating a cash trust, and you want that cash trust to receive your insurance maturity benefit, or your sum assured, or your pension benefits, or monies that are coming into this, or you're funding it to meet a specific purpose. Part of the revocability things would be you also want to change the purpose. Maybe you wanted it to be an education trust. You want to change it into probably a medical trust or a family care trust. That may be construed to be a revocability because you're totally changing the perspective. You'll not be charged in doing that. Or you want to wind it up and revert the money back to yourself. The trustee should not charge you for doing that, because all they need to do is to actually now wind up the portfolio, pay it back to you. And because you've actually paid them annual fees in managing that trust. Now, ideally, for family trusts in Kenya, if you're creating a family trust and you're transferring family assets, hard assets, the law prohibits you from creating a revocable trust. You have to create that as an irrevocable trust. And that's the only way that you probably benefit on those tax advantages. Simply being that there are a lot of advantages that have been brought on board that can be abused if someone probably decides to pull in assets into the trust and pull them out at wish. So the law has deliberately prohibited people from creating revocable trusts that are holding hard assets. But obviously, there are a lot of changes that happen in law, and over time, because we are doing this on a day-to-day basis, we should be able to guide any trusts that are on board on any of these changes and probably any provisions that may be they can take advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Oh, we've been doing this now for 2 hours, 2 hours, 15 minutes. I know it's been a lot of information, but Peter, you've done such an amazing job. And thank you so much. If our participants would get to know the story behind how I got you to be our instructor for today's class. It really talks so much of just how personable you are and how approachable you are. So it's truly been an honor to have you as our instructor for this class. And I know we are now at the very, very tail end of our masterclass. Please, before you drop off the class, say something to Peter as you're leaving. Just give him his flowers before you drop off. Also, tell us if your expectations were met. Your expectations of this masterclass have been met. What you can expect from us in the coming week is, number one, we will get to share with you the recording of this masterclass, and not only the recording of the masterclass, also on your emails, please be on the lookout. We will get to share with you detailed information now, even product information now. For example, on the family trust, on the cash trusts that Peter keeps alluding to, because I've just seen a question in the Q&A asking, now, namkulima mdogo, do we all have to start at 350K? Because yes, the setup cost, even if it is staggered in, over a period of months, it may still be steep for some of us. So in such a case, you'll get to be shown like maybe what is that trust fund, especially the cash trust, that you can get started with. And just to understand it better, for you to understand what are the financial assets that you can have in that cash trust. But all in all, Makofi for all of you, our participants too. You came in huge numbers. Thank you for honoring us with your time on a whole Saturday and rainy morning. It's a sacrifice. To the amazing Nahashon, Jane and Susan, you've been superstars on this Q&A board. We are truly grateful. Thank you for keeping up with the queries and answering very ably. And to our instructor, Peter, thank you very much. This truly has been a masterclass. It's our hope that we will keep engaging. This is truly refreshing. It's good to see you, as the face of ICEA Lion Trust Company coming into this masterclass. And we do hope to do more with you. We do hope to have more Q&As with you. You actually make this, you have a passion when you talk about trusts and estate planning, and you make it easy to digest. So we are truly grateful for your time. And to everyone who made this possible. Nyokabi, they're behind the scenes at the ICEA Lion marketing team. Fantastic work. Thank you for running this masterclass so smoothly and giving us access even to your company tools to use for purposes of this class, where we were expecting way more people than my own Zoom can handle. So all in all, super grateful to all the attendees. You've been amazing. We are still at 109. And at this point, you can leave this class at your will. But Mjue, one, this is a testament to the fact that Kenyans are now woke, financially woke, and we want to gather as much information as we can, and we are planning ahead. And I tell you, that means that our generation, we are the generation, that will be able to pass on our wealth for hundreds of years. There will be continuity. At the beginning, the poll asked, how many generations, do you know? And you could tell from the data, from our responses, most of us can only go back up to our great-grandparents. We don't know our fourth generation, our fifth generation, our sixth, and so on. And these types of structures that Peter has taken us through today can help us now keep our family wealth within the family, and for that history to actually be carried throughout the different generations. So all in all, mbarikiwe sana. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you a lovely weekend. In the coming week, please expect to get communication from us, and we also will send out invites to you to also make bookings for the one-on-one session. So if you're ready now to sit down with a consultant from ICEA Lion Trust Company and do a one-on-one, we'll be able to facilitate that for you. So thank you, mbarikiwe sana, and have a blessed weekends.